Today we're going to talk about the Nancy Guthrie missing person case. Well, we could call it the $1 million mystery case. Because the award for helping solve this case, $1 million. So we're going to talk about that and more on this episode of CharlieCrimebuster. What some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. The Charlie Crimebuster name and all forms and abbreviations are property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains adult subject matter. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello, folks, and welcome back to the Charlie Crime Train today. Today, we're going to be talking about the sad case of the missing mother of Savannah Guthrie and how it went from the hottest case almost to a cold case.
The following podcast is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. Audio is provided by Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com.
Hey, thank you for joining us. This will be our second podcast on this particular case. But before we get into the case, please hit that subscribe button and that like button so that we can share our case with others. You see, there's someone out there who knows something about this case, and even the smallest wee bit of information could crack this case wide open. Hey, by the way, also, please take time to check out our sponsor, PeacemakerNetwork.com. Support the brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. Our first responders, the cops, and the military. Read all about it at PeacemakerNetwork.com. Now, this case is unusual in several different ways. First of all, it involves a senior person, 84 years of age. Now, most of the senior cases where senior people go missing, basically, well, it usually has more to do with dementia than crime. But this one is a crime. It's a kidnapping. And there are some interesting facts about kidnapping. It is highly unusual for the person kidnapped to be a senior. In fact, the average age of a kidnapped person, 26.5 years of age. And the suspect in those cases are more than likely a boyfriend or a family member. It does happen at an average of at 4 a.m. in the morning, and they are most likely kidnapped from their residence. That's what the stats tell us about kidnapping. Oh, by the way, the majority of people that are kidnapped are white people. And so it was early on February the 1st, 2026, that Nancy Guthrie, this 84-year-old mother of Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie, well, it is that time that she's believed to have been taken from her Arizona home. The very next day, the local news station received a ransom demand by email. Entertainment news source TMZ got its own ransom email on February the 3rd, as other media outlets did, including another local station. We're going to talk a little more about that ransom in a moment. But this one, by the way, demanded millions in Bitcoin for Guthrie's safe return. They also issued 2 deadlines, both which had passed. Now, the interesting thing about a ransom note is that it can become a great opportunity for investigators to find evidence to help solve the crime. Investigators, of course, are always on the alert for possible kidnapping for money. And with victims like Nancy Guthrie, of course, we all know she's a high-profile person. She has family members who have a fair amount of wealth. And you would immediately start thinking that this really could be an issue over ransom. Now, there is a guy by the name of Michael Alzer. He's a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, also a retired NYPD detective, former hostage negotiator. He says that the ransom demand is, quote, unquote, like a crime scene in itself. Of course, with physical ransom notes, they want to preserve it. They want to see if their lab can get fingerprint analysis off of it, or any kind of hair or fiber or DNA. But there are other forms of ransoms that can also be investigated. Like in this case, it was an email. Then the authorities have their computer crime squad to see if they can track down by the way of metadata, identify the server they were using, and of course get subpoenas to identify where that email came from. Now, we're not privy to know what they found out about these notes as far as a digital investigation. But in addition to these ransom messages, where many of them are legitimate, unfortunately, they must also deal with fakes, hoax ransom requests from third parties with no connection to the original abduction. Well, they can occur in high-profile cases. Media coverage draws in a lot of people, and a lot of those people are seeking attention, sadly, and in a very cruel way. And there are those out who will take opportunity to try to make a quick buck and make demand. An example of that was Elizabeth Smart. Remember that? She was 14 years of age when she was taken from her Salt Lake City bedroom back in June of 2002. Now that, of course, drew nationwide attention all the way until she was rescued in March of 2003. Now, in October and November of 2002, while Smart was still missing, well, the Salt Lake City police, they did receive emails demanding a ransom. One even asked for $3 million. And in October, the writer threatened to hurt Smart if the ransom wasn't paid. Well, the authorities, they were right on that. They tracked down the man behind the message, and in October 2003, that guy pleaded guilty to 2 federal charges for his fake demands and threats. Now, People magazine, they have reported that the initial ransom demands for Guthrie, that it did contain some very interesting information. Information about an Apple Watch, a damaged floodlight, that only the kidnappers would know, which, of course, that brought some credibility to these messages. And since the initial contact, TMC received additional ransom emails. But we have to at least think that there's a possibility that fraud could have gotten involved in these cases. In fact, there is a man right now that is facing federal charges because of a fake ransom involved in this. But I did some digging and I did find out something that's a little bit disturbing, maybe quite a bit disturbing. Even from the first half of 2025, there is a disturbing trend now that has emerged across the United States, and that is a spike in domestic kidnapping for ransom cases. These incidents occurred in cities and in rural towns alike. And there is, of course, with what's happening in the country today with economic hardship, then sometimes organized criminal activity, then this will be a part of the world we're living in today. Now, kidnapping has long been associated with foreign cartels or war zones. But the recent cases, well, they're now suggesting, sadly, that the practice is taking root within American borders. It's from North Carolina to Texas to Utah and California. There was a string of high-profile abductions that did catch national attention. The cases vary, of course, in the method and the motive, but they do all share a chilling characteristic. Ransom demands reflect a growing desperation and a shift in America's criminal behavior. For instance, in Garner, North Carolina, 3 suspects entered a home in April 2025, kidnapped a woman and her 11-month-old daughter. Authorities there reported that they demanded $1 million in ransom from the victim's husband. But however, thanks to real good law enforcement intervention, the hostages were recovered safely within hours, suspects taken into custody. Then in Houston, Texas, there was another one who was held captive by a human trafficker who demanded $2,000 ransom from the victim's family. The man was seeking a new life in the United States, and he did escape by leaping from a second-story window and then alerted authorities. Then there was Mill Creek, Utah. A man there held his pregnant girlfriend and members of her family hostage, get this, for nearly 6 months. He convinced them they were being hunted by a cartel. And that, of course, ended up in criminal charges of aggravated kidnapping and domestic abuse. Then there's California, which also reported a trouble case in Lafayette where a man was convicted of kidnapping for ransom, other charges after holding a family hostage during a violent home invasion. Prosecutors say that the event was planned, premeditated, and they pointed to the evolution of those crimes and these situations that are happening. So what is driving this increase? What is driving this rise in domestic kidnapping for ransom? And again, it's just a lot of what's happening in the country that we live in today. But the fact is, unlike other patterns of domestic kidnapping tied to just family custody disputes or individual vendettas, the last couple years has seen a shift more toward calculated forms of kidnapping. These perpetrators demanded high-value ransom. They even used encrypted communications, and they target individuals believed to be financially or socially vulnerable. Now, the digital landscape has also made it easier for criminals to demand payment. That's why we're hearing things about cryptocurrency, anonymous banking apps. Some ransom notes have been delivered by encrypted messages platform. And in a few instances, victims, they were coerced into making digital transactions before release. Of course, all this is complicating the response from authorities. It requires not only swift physical intervention, but also having the ability to trace digital footprints. They have to coordinate across jurisdictions, and they have to monitor the financial system, the banks, for these illicit transactions. But back to our main focus. There was a ransom demand in this case. Now we know there were ransom notes, but the question is, were they real or not? We're going to get back to that in the ransom note as we talk about this $1 million mystery. But right now it's time to pause, kind of take stock of where we are, and share with you, for a brief moment, CharlieCrimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, our Crazy Crook story today comes from South Carolina. Officials on Monday, they said there was an inmate at the Chesterfield County Detention Center. He was charged with trespassing. Minor charge. And he was then charged with something else. A judge had set the bond for inmate Patrick Alexander, 33, of Mississippi, in the amount of $250 on a trespassing charge. Now, after being given his personal property, Alexander reportedly removed a wad of money, sorted through the bills, and handed the judge 3 $100 bills. And get this, the bond was for $250, but he told the judge, keep the change. But, my friend, this judge wasn't impressed by the suspect's supposed generosity. Instead, the judge told Alexander he could not keep the change, but while he was holding the money, get this, he noticed the color of the bills appeared a little unusual. And upon further inspection, the judge observed Chinese writing on the back of the bills. A detention officer then checked the bills using a counterfeit detection pen and found out that those bills, the bills that were used to pay for the bond, it was counterfeit. And then Alexander, he was informed the currency was fake. And then the judge, he laid the law down, instructed the detention officer to hold the money as evidence. And so now, we find that a minor charge of trespassing soon was changed to counterfeit money and forgery. Warrant was obtained, served on Alexander at the county detention center. And under the South Carolina Code, forgery. It is unlawful for a person to falsely make, forge, or counterfeit, or knowingly assist in the making or counterfeiting of any writing or instrument. So now, this guy who only had a very slight charge of trespassing now is facing felony charges because he is indeed CharlieCrimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. I don't know what it is about these crazy crooks, folks, but they keep showing up. All right, back to our main focus. There was a ransom demand. We know that now. But do we know whether that ransom notes was legit or not? Now, we know for a fact authorities have been looking at these notes very carefully, and they have to consider whether those notes were real or not. There will be an analyzing of the particular consistency of the message. They will investigate that, and they will look at that, and they will try to determine whether it was real or not. Now, we do know that the note demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin for her safe return. They set two deadlines, 5 p.m. local time, and a second deadline for back in February the 9th. Both of those, of course, were not met. The message warned that if the first deadline was to be missed, the demand would change. And if the ransom wasn't fulfilled by February the 9th, there would be more serious consequence. The first note actually included a real Bitcoin address where the ransom could be deposited to, but it did not provide any way for the family to contact the sender. How about the details, though, in that note? The most striking element of the first ransom note was its inclusion of specific details about Nancy Guthrie's Apple Watch and a floodlight at her home. And, according to reports, authorities had not made that public. Yet at the same time, the sheriff's office, they acknowledge that there's an absolute possibility that the ransom notes have nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, even though authorities were taking them seriously. In fact, the FBI and the Sheriff's Department issued a joint statement saying that they are actively inspecting the information provided in these messages to see if they are authentic or not. And, of course, all this perhaps encourage others to exploit the situation. In fact, we do now know that a California resident by the name of Derek Kilala, 42 years of age, was arrested after he sent text messages to Nancy Guthrie's daughter, Annie, back a few days ago. He basically said, "Did you get the Bitcoin? And we're waiting on our end for the transaction." Minutes after sending the text, though, data obtained by police got them their man, and they found out that he was a fake. And he did confess to officers that he had been following the case on television, sent texts after finding the Guthrie's contact information, he said, quote unquote, to see if the family would respond. He was charged 2 counts of transmitting communications containing demand for ransom, and he appeared some time back a few days ago in federal court in Santa Ana, California. And here's what the U.S. Attorney said about that. The Department of Justice will protect victims and families at all costs, and grief profiteers will be held accountable. So now, where are we in this case? We do know now there's a $1 million award for anybody that will help solve this case. I call it the $1 million mystery. We do know that videos now have been released of the alleged perp, and they've gone online. Yet, unfortunately, no luck on identifying the person in the video. And we do know the authorities are looking at several situations. One involves the security gate at Nancy's residence. Some experts have speculated that there may have been more than one abductor, even to the point that one could have already been inside while the outside man was seen walking around the residence. We also know that authorities are now looking at people who recently moved from that area. We also know they're also running down construction workers who've been working on building new homes in the area, much like the well-known missing person case here in Orlando, where it was speculated that it was a construction worker, who was involved in her disappearance. But, my friend, sadly, there is even a darker point to the investigation. One guy by the name of Michael Gold, who's a former Nassau County lieutenant, founder of NYPD's K-9 unit, this is what he said. He said his assessment is that Nancy likely died within the first 72 hours and will ultimately be recovered. Gold now, who had previously estimated there was an under 10% chance that Nancy was still alive, he's now gone even further, offered a rough timeline of when she may have passed. And his reasoning all centers around a detail that's haunted the case from the beginning. You see, Nancy's health has been an issue in this case. The 84-year-old required daily medication for a heart condition, according to reporting. People who go without those pills for more than 24 hours, well, it could be fatal. And Gold, he did not mince words about what that means after 30 days. He said Nancy was elderly and poor health, required life-sustaining medication, and it's now been over a month. The medical reality, combined with the apparent stalling of leads, and even the FBI's wind down on the site activity, well, it has led Gold to conclude that the investigation has crossed that painful threshold. He went on to say this is no longer, in his opinion, a rescue mission. Recovery does not bring closure. It simply removes the uncertainty of not knowing where she is. And there are those right now that are looking closer around the area, not for a living person, but for a body. So at this point, it still remains a $1 million mystery. But we also know that the family is looking at this dark side. Their latest update came in the form of a half-hour special on a local television station there in Tucson. It was entitled, Bring Her Home, the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Now that program revisited the timeline of Nancy's abduction. It explored the impact of the case. And during the broadcast, reporters recapped how Nancy vanished in the hours around January 31st. She was seen that day, but when relatives could not reach her, she was reported missing the following morning on February the 1st. They went on to say in this special that we desperately ask the community for renewed attention in our mom's case. Please check your camera footage, journal notes, text messages, observations, conversations. They may hold significance. No detail is too small. It may be the key that breaks the case. These pleas do come in missing persons cases, but this one was amplified on an unusually large platform through Savannah Guthrie. She's used her position on NBC's Today Show to speak directly to viewers about her mother's disappearance. They recorded multiple video messages appealing for information for her mother's safe return. And in that special on that Saturday, you can tell that the tone has actually shifted to the dark side. They went on to say, quote, in their statement, "We miss our mom of every breath. We cannot be at peace until she is home. We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder. Our focus is solely on finding her and bringing her home. We want to celebrate her beautiful and courageous life, but cannot do so until she's brought to a final place of rest. Thank you for continuing to pray without ceasing." Even that message tells us that people are realizing the possibility of finding this loved one alive is very, very low. So, my friend, there's where we are on this case. It is indeed a $1 million mystery. If you have any information whatsoever about this case and you're listening to this podcast, please notify authorities. Even though you may not think that what you know about this case is significant, it may be significant, and it may be the information that actually breaks this case wide open. So to all of you crime buffs out there, let's not forget about this case. This is a case that deserves to be solved. There is a lady who has been taken from her home by force, and people who have been very cruel have brought harm to this family. Please, if you know something, say something. Well, there it is, the $1 million mystery, and it's still out there. Let's work together to see it solved. Till this time next time, this is CharlieCrimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, may be your very own.
You have been listening to CharlieCrimebuster. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and also encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag @CharlieCrimebuster, and then click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts, or for you to say to your smart speaker, play CharlieCrimebuster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you, so please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.